working yarn. We're going to start with a slip knot. You put the end over top the working yarn, and then you pull that through so that the yarn coming from your skein will be the one slipping. Tighten it up. You're going to take your loop, place it behind the next peg, and pull the working yarn through. Loop behind, pull the working yarn through. Do this all the way around the loom. For the brim is where we will be doing our 2x2 rib stitch, so every 2 pegs should be marked. I've got 2 marked with a P, and then empty, and then 2 marked. I just use something that starts with a P, purple, so I remember I don't get confused. So to do your purl stitch, I'll show you a few times. You take your loom tool down through the top of the stitch, hold your working yarn underneath, and you pull that yarn through. At this point, you take off that original stitch, your loom, that peg is empty, you put that new loop on and tighten it up. Next one, loom tool through the top, working yarn underneath, pull it up, old stitch off, new stitch on. Now, for the knit stitch, you're actually doing the opposite. Working the loom tool through the bottom up to the top, working yarn above the stitch, and now you're pulling the loop down. You still take that, okay, that one was a little tighter. You still take that original stitch off and tighten the new stitch. And you don't want to have your tension too tight. That way your brim will be really stretchy. So again, loom tool up through the bottom, working yarn above the stitch, pull the working yarn down, and then you pop off that old stitch, put that new one on, tighten it up. I will go over them both one more time. So knit goes down through the top, pull the working yarn up, old stitch off, new stitch on, purl, down through the top, working yarn below, up, and then you take your old stitch off, new stitch on. My cast on row is a little tighter, so once you get past your cast on row, it'll be a lot easier to remove the previous stitches. Knit stitch up through the bottom, working yarn over the top, pull it down, and put your new stitch on. Again, up through the bottom, working yarn across the top, pull it down, old stitch off, new stitch on. You'll be working 5 rows, and then I will show you how to switch colors, and we'll get started with our green. It is time to change to our green, so I cut the working yarn, I don't know, about 4 or 5 inches long. One thing I did want to talk about before we start on the next row is before we change colors, instead of going straight into the 2x2 ribbing, that's what was done here, we are actually going to do a row of just knit stitch, and then we will do the 2x2 ribbing for 5 rows. So you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We'll do that 2x2 ribbing for 5 rows. So it will go from looking like that to looking like this. You want to work at least 4 stitches all together. But remember, this first row is straight knit stitch. So you're pulling the loop down from. Now this first one, as you can see, it's wanting to kind of go all over the place, but you can tighten it up. See? You want to make sure you got both of those. So up through the bottom, pull the working yarn down, pop off that old stitch and put the new one on. That's when you can tighten both of these up. And look at that, I pulled my peg marker down with it. There we go. But you tighten both of those up so that you don't have any of the brown in with this stitch. And then I'll show you a couple more, because once that first one's hooked in, then you're good. Old stitch off, new stitch on, kind of tighten that up. Old stitch. Try again. Okay. Old stitch off, new stitch on. I will do one more with both. And new stitch on. At this point, you can take the other tail and just throw it behind and then keep going. Now you will do one row just doing the knit stitch, and then after that you will have 5 rows of your ribbing. So you'll work back to here with knit, and then these two you'll go back to purl, knit, for 5 rows. Then you'll change your color again, and you'll do 1 row in brown in the knit stitch, and then you will do 5 rows in brown with your purl 2, knit 2, purl 2, knit 2. Work up to that, and then I'll show you how to do the rest. This is what you should be looking at. You'll notice that the color change, you can see it on the inside, but it's nice and smooth on the outside. A lot nicer. Now what you want to do is go ahead and switch your yarn to the green again and do 4 rows of knit stitch. Then I will show you how to do bobbles. Now we do our first row with bobbles. But what we are going to do is we are going to knit 3 stitches, then bobble on 1, knit 3, bobble on another one. So we're going to get started. We're going to go ahead and knit these first 3. Just knit 1. Oops. Knit 2. And knit 3. To do your bobble, you are going to knit this stitch 4 times and then pull up that first stitch. So what we're going to do is, okay, 1, 2, 3, here we are. To do a knit stitch, we take the working yarn. This blue is going to be our working yarn because the bobbles are going to be blue. We pull it down, take the old stitch off, put the new stitch on. Here's the string that we will connect with the other end once we get around. Wrap around the back, do another knit stitch. You can tighten that up a bit, wrap around the back. Here's our third. Take the loop off, See, now it's not moving. Wrap around the back for our fourth. Oops. And take that off. Now I said we will be pulling up the first stitch. If you pull this down, you want to find the first place you see the blue, which was right there, because we want only the one color. We want the whole bobble to be blue. But you grab that first stitch. Now this was the cast on one, so it's going to be a little tighter. And you put it up on the peg. Your next row, you will use both of these stitches as one. So when you go to knit the next row, both those stitches will be taken over at the same time. Okay, now move on. Now we are going to do our bobble, which it doesn't really matter whether you run the yarn above or below. I just out of habit tend to try to do the same thing each time. Okay, so knit one around the back, knit two around the back, knit, oops, knit three around the back, and knit four. Put that stitch on. Now again, we are going to find that very first one. It's looped right here. I'm going to grab that, just the blue, not the green, and put that back up on here. There it is. You do this all the way around the loom. When you are back to the beginning, here's my green and here is my blue. I took and cut the blue. You can either leave it hang and weave it in later, or you can take and go ahead, wrap a couple of the blue pegs with it. Now that we're back to just the green, we're going to skip this first blue, and we are going to we are going to knit, get it to the third, we knit the first three, and then when we knit this fourth one, you take all the strands over, put it down, tighten it on the loom. I'll show you again. I'm going to knit three. When you get to the blue, you go ahead and knit it, taking both strands over. If the tension's tight, you may need to take them over with your loom tool. You go ahead and knit 3 rows. Change your color back to the brown, and you will knit 1 row, and then you're going to do 5 rows of the 2x2 ribbing, just as you had marked before. So purl 2, knit 2, purl 2, knit 2. Switch the yarn out to blue, and I'm going to repeat this section right here, except the background is blue and the bobble is green. So I'm going to go ahead and knit 4 rows, and then I'll show you how to do the bobble again. 4 rows of blue are done, and I have knit 3, and I started my green on the 4th because now we are doing bobbles again, but these ones, the bobbles are going to be green while the background will be blue. I'm going to show you just a couple more times how to do that. So you wrap the yarn around the back of the peg. Wrap the yarn around the back of the peg. Pull the loop down. Put the new loop on. We're going to do 4 of these. 2. 3. The 4 stitches on there. You can see the chain, and now we are going to pull up those first stitches, which that's where our cast on string was. So I'm going to tighten that up. All of the repeats are done. I am on this first set of rib stitch at the top. So just the same as this, the exact same actually. 1 row, knit stitch, and then 5 rows, your rib stitch. Switch to green, do the same. Switch back to the brown, do the same. After that, the only thing left is to show you how to do the decrease and your cast off. So go ahead and get all the way up to the top part, and I'll show you what to do. We're at our cast off point, and if you look, once you get past your first set of the blue with the green bobbles, everything after that point is just a mirrored copy of the other half. So to do the cast off, what we're going to do here, make sure I've got everything in view. Yes. There are so many pegs. Let me see how many pegs are on this one. I can't remember. I think 80. Yes. One thing I love about these looms, look at this. Tells you 80 pegs right there. Anyway, there are 80 pegs on this loom. We are going to use what's called a flat top bind off or cast off. And what this does is this really helps to take a lot of that bulk out of the top of your hat. This is actually my favorite way to cast off for a hat. I have switched to where this is what I do every single time now. I just really like the result. To do this, we're going to decrease some of these pegs. And what we're going to do is we're going to take every... Where am I at here? Okay. Go ahead. I didn't... Oh. That one was a true knit. There we go. Now I'm back at the first. This was my pearls. We're going to take every 4th peg and place it on the stitch off of every 4th peg and place it on the peg before it. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Depending on your tension, if you need to twist the stitch, that is fine. Just try to do it the same way each time. As you can see, I'm kind of flipping mine around the front. You can also take and not twist it and kind of See, for me, my tension's tight, so that's harder. Bring around the back. As long as you're getting the stitch off the one peg and onto the next. And if your tension is too tight and you're having trouble moving the stitches, you can actually kind of work along with it. I'll show you that in a minute. But you do this all the way around the loom. Now, what I was talking about, we'll just assume I've done this all the way around the loom. I'm not using the true knit stitch. I'm just going to do a flat stitch. You can use the true knit stitch if you want. But if your tension is really tight when moving the stitches over, you can go ahead and work like the first couple pegs and then move the stitch. That will help with the tension some. And I find it easier to take one stitch off at a time. I'll show you why on this one. It can be a lot harder to move them. If your tension isn't very tight, then you can do it, but I find if my tension's tight and I try that, sometimes this stitch will pop off, and it's a little more difficult to pick it up when you have two to pick up. So I just take one off at a time. See, that one was pretty tight, and I popped the regular stitch off. Let me do that again. There we go. So you go all the way around the loom, and when you're done with this part, you will have 3 pegs with 1 stitch on each, an empty peg all the way around. At this point, we're going to decrease again. So now we're going to take that middle stitch out of those 3 and move it over. And you can see where I've done like my U-stitch, how tight my tension is. You can do the true knit stitch and that will really help with the tension. Oops. See, but I'm going to take the second stitch, move it over, do that all the way around, and what you're going to have is 1 stitch, empty peg, 2 stitches, empty peg, 1 stitch, empty peg, 2 stitches, empty peg, all the way around. And you work these just the same. I take that top stitch off. See, my tension is way too tight for that row. Top stitch off, bottom stitch, and then I move on to the next. So go around the loom. When you're done, you will have 1 stitch on every other peg. Now we are ready to officially do the cast off and get this thing off the loom. So you want to take your working yarn and wrap around your loom 1.5 to 2 times. That's to give you enough string to do this cast off. Okay. Now what we're going to do is we are going to pull the yarn through every other stitch on the loom. You can pull it, oh, I got that in, up through the bottom, down through the top. It doesn't matter. So I'm putting the working yarn behind. As long as you just do the same way. I'm pulling mine up through the bottom like I'm doing a purl stitch. And then I go behind. Pull that through. Oop. There we go. Work all the way around the loom. At this point, you can take and all the loops, I'm going to leave this one on here just because this is where the string's coming from, but all of the loops that you went through, which will be every other stitch, you can actually pop them off the loom if you would like. Now watch this, like tighten it up. You're going to see it start pulling. Now we are going and picking up all the rest of the stitches. I'm going to skip this one right here and do this one. And then, see, now you'll be picking up every single stitch, and you can take them off the loom as you are picking them up, or you can wait until you have them all wrapped or all done and then take it off the loom. If you find you are working the cast off and you don't have enough yarn to go all the way around, then you do want to pop off the stitches that you've worked, and then you can just tighten this up. Just make sure you don't pop any stitches off. But you can kind of tighten that up and get some more yarn to work with. And see, I'll just go ahead and pop these off as I work. These stitches, they pop off very, very easily. You just want to make sure that you catch them all. You don't want to accidentally miss one and then it get popped off, because then that stitch will come undone all the way down through the project. So if something like that happens, you want to catch the stitch and put a stitch marker or something on it to keep it from getting worse. Okay, well, this is one I'd already done. And here's my last one. Oops. I can get this out of the way. And now, I'll zoom in some so you can see what's going on here. You're going to have two strands that are going to tighten up. And what will tighten first is that first round we did. So if you can see, only one round is tightening. But we want to watch, because we don't want that to just tighten up and then have all these loops like this. So what I do is, got to get it to pull that inner one. So I kind of tighten it and stretch it out. Or you can put something there to kind of tighten around and pull against. You can see how some of these are. See how that's looking? Once you get it tightened up about as much as you think you can from this direction, we want to pull the string to the inside to finish the hat up. So that's why you want to make sure the hole doesn't close off completely. But if you look, there's a ring and here's a ring. So there's actually two separate rings going around. I pull that through, flip the hat inside out, and you can kind of see them a little better there. But I'm going to hold on to that for a moment, because see how a lot of those are tightening up more? You want to make sure you do not pull this so tight that it breaks that strand. You break that strand, it's not an easy thing to pick up and fix. But I take, at this point, you can use crochet hook, tapestry needle, anything. But I take the strand and I'll run it through a loop. Got that strand, and then you pull the working yarn through. Pull the working yarn through. See how long that is. And then you kind of pull that tight. It makes a little knot. Because you don't really need, you don't have to have a huge knot. See, there's the one round and there's the second one. You don't need a huge knot to hold this in. You just make your little knot, and then I take my crochet hook and weave it through a few. I don't need that much yarn. I just need a little bit, just a few inches. You can weave it through to where it actually follows along the stitches and matches them perfectly. Honestly, the way this is done, nobody's going to notice. And this is what you do with all of these. You weave them through. I just weave them through with the collar that I'm working with. And then I kind of stretch it some. I stretch it out some, and then I snip it off. I leave a little bit of a tail out, but I snip it off so that will stay in place. Now let me move. Let me zoom all the way out. And here is your completed hat. Like, how stinking cute is that? I love this pattern. I like the collars. I like the texture. You got a good bit going on. And if you're newer, you do your knit stitch, you do your purl stitch, and then you have your bobbins, and then the flat top cast off and collar changing. So there's a lot of things for someone who is just learning how to loom knit. This is all I got for this pattern for you guys. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. Don't forget the PDF, video links, and blog link all in the video description below. Thank you guys for watching.